The next book I would like to review for you tonight is called Becoming a Man, Half a Life's Story by, I know his last name looks like Monette, but it's actually pronounced Paul Monette. Paul Monette was a poet, and he also wrote several volumes of autobiography. His life was cut short by AIDS. I think he passed away in, it was 1993 or 1995, something like that. And he was very, very young, under the age of 50. I might actually have the details of that in the review. It's just been several months since I wrote the review, so I've forgotten them. Excuse me. Paul Monette's early life is marked by the conformity and I guess the pent-up rage that you might expect to find in the Bildungsroman of a young gay man growing up in mid-20th century America. He has this ability to pass for straight, but that comes at a cost, to wit the inability of ever having to admit to anyone that he's actually not gay. Because when you seem like you're not, no one really asks you if you are. From the time that he's a small child, Paul seems tragically torn, more so than any other figures in well-known gay memoirs who come of age at about the same time in American history. And I'm thinking specifically about Edmund White here. His book, The Beautiful Room is Empty, and his other volumes of memoirs. I can't speak about the other volumes. I know The Beautiful Room is Empty is a spectacular book. Go read it if you're interested in the coming of age of a young gay man in the 1950s. It's one of the best. Whereas White's memoirs explore sexual openness and the life of the mind, Monette can only begin to feel comfortable with the latter, being more of a bookish sort. Certainly not to suggest that Edmund White is not a scholar in his own right, but Monette never really seems to approach being comfortable with his sexuality until he's older, well into adulthood. He was already one to get straight A's, but whose courage balked when it came to admitting his sexuality to a close friend or a family member. Beneath that Yale and Andover educated genteel exterior is the heart of an enraged activist who, if he had a problem with admitting his homosexuality, certainly had fewer problems with the use of hyperbole in his book. He blithely claims that within the first few pages of Becoming a Man, that genocide is still the national sport of straight men. And he goes on to clarify that Stephen Kolzak, one of his former lovers, died of homophobia, murdered by barbaric priests and petty bureaucrats. And I think Stephen Kolzak died of AIDS, not a sort of violent attack by people who were expressing violence against him as a gay man. I think his reference to murder by barbaric priests and petty bureaucrats is a reference to the Reagan era silence that AIDS met when it became a public health crisis. I would never be the first to suggest that the national response to the HIV and AIDS epidemic in its initial years was rapid or even proportionate to need, but Monette's, I guess, moralizing language is certainly a an exercise in maybe blame shifting a bit. It sounds very self-righteous. One review, whose overall impression of the book was much less favorable than mine, I did actually happen to like it overall, nevertheless mentioned something very striking about the man who wrote it. He seems to consist of two different personalities. This very strident, outspoken, loud activist type, and then you have this sort of bookish, genteel, sophisticated, literate man. And I guess one of the interesting things about reading the book is trying to reconcile these two personalities with one another. Nor does he self-consciously really explore his balkanized personality. I'm not sure he really has the self-knowledge to do so when he wrote this book. He seems supremely unhappy in being unable to be open about his sexuality to most people, but he does nothing to really change this, and this repressed self sits right there in the book. It's, silently next to the one that rails against America with clenched fist about, committing genocide against those people with HIV and AIDS. It's a perplexing picture of these two people, but a strikingly human one and a poignant one and a compelling one, I think. I've noted before in my reviews of memoirs that I don't read many of them, and I don't. And that I somehow have to be struck by the life of the author before I'll pick one up. Monette obviously was gay. Edmund White's homosexuality and love of ideas were two big invitations for me as a much younger reader when I stumbled across The Beautiful Room is Empty. Again, go read The Beautiful Room is Empty. It's a beautiful book. I found this book, my first experience reading Monette, honest and forthright and highly personal in his trying to give an account of oneself, which is really what an autobiography is all about. I think trying to give a true and honest account of oneself is maybe the hardest thing that a person is the hardest thing you can ask of someone. Sit down and write your autobiography and try not to be biased about it. It's tough. And I recognize that difficulty, and him trying to come to terms with himself is admirable. Perhaps I'm grateful for his rage and his furor, discombobulated as it was. It allowed decades on for people like me to not have to re-wage the battles that he already fought, personal and public. An interesting book. Sort of, I think it won the National Book Award and was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize when it came out in the early 90s. Becoming a Man, Half a Life Story by Paul Monette.